I'm feeling much better today. I slept a solid 8.5 hours last night and then took almost a 4 hour nap this afternoon. Um, so I'm feeling pretty good right now. He said as he choked on his own spit. So let's say hey to everybody. Matt, welcome in. Sorry about that. Um, Socknell, been into us. Been into us. Sorry. Ooh, I still got a little tickle there. Teresa, welcome in. Good to see you. Cave Geek is here. What's up? Kyle, thank you again for the sub. DCI Banks is here. Fall Machine is here. What's up? What's up? Good to see you. Hope everybody's doing well. You've been wondering if deconstructionist politics is a thing. Sure have been thinking about it recently. Um, there are definitely postmodernist views of governance, and we can cover that stuff when we get there. Will probably be part of a later episode in our series here on government and politics. Probably fairly later on, though. That's going to be something that we'll probably discuss towards the end of the series. How many episodes until we get to how democracies fall into authoritarianism and how they recover asking for a friend? Moose, we're not super duper far from that, believe it or not. We have this episode here where we're going to be talking about kingdom growth and the need for continued influx of primary materials, and that's going to bring up empires. And then we will sort of be at, historically speaking, kind of a realm where things stabilize chronologically for a fairly decent period of time. We don't really start getting a lot of new political ideas during the um, during the hype train that's incoming. Big Tuna Neil is here. That's the highest number ever before 50. Tuna, thank you so much for your continued Spartacacity. Um, Thanks very much for the subscription and your continued support, my friends. Good to see you. So, for most of human history in the what we might call the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, we're not going to get an overwhelmingly large amount of dramatic political ideology. We're going to talk in the next stream a little bit about how different people have handled empires and a couple of different views of imperial sort of theory when it comes to how we govern all of this stuff. But then the next step is probably going to be into what we would say is much more of a kind of classical government structure where we talk about uh, effectively like the Greek system, where we have the polis and how we have different ideas about uh, the burgeoning concept of democracy, which does show up during classical Greek world. So that's probably two streams away, not including this one. So this one and then the one after and the one after was probably where we will first talk uh, about democracy. And in democracy, of course, we have the somewhat overhyped model of Greek progression from one type of government to the next, which doesn't actually follow most of the time. But people today have this sort of I don't know. We just have this love affair with ancient Greek politics, and we try to cram them into this neat little cycle where things move in a dependable circle, even though historically they don't really. But we'll talk about what that cycle is and how it's not completely accurate. And one of the things that happens, of course, during the Greek world is that we get the first real views of what happens when democracies shift out of democratic rule and into things like oligarchy and then further into things like tyranny. But that is not necessarily the neat little circle that everybody wants to draw and include on their PowerPoint presentation about Greek politics. It doesn't work that neatly. What's up, Silver? Good to see you. Welcome in. Ra is here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. The more news that you see, the more you agree. Amanda Borealis, welcome in. Good to see you. Today was a disaster of a meeting. It was. You know the circle that I'm referring to, but you were thinking of a single situation. Yeah, I know what you're talking about, Moose. Also, good to see you. Pienso que este mundo es más que loco con lo cual no tenemos que razón no algo más. Yo no sé también. El mundo ahora está muy loco. Muy, muy loco. Sock now is just sharing a belief that the world right now is crazy and we don't really have a reason to be crazy anymore. Just because it's we don't it's just all going kind of squirrely, right? For those of you that are watching later on, perhaps on either YouTube or the VOD, today is the day where the meeting with J.D. Vance and President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine happened in the White House, where they all got into a shouting match. And that's why we might be a little bit silly about stuff, and we might be a little bit concerned about things. So if you're watching in the future, that will give you some context as to the background of what's happening today. Yeah, that's true. All right. So we could talk about that more at the end if everybody really wants to, and I'm sure that everybody probably does. My Spanish has improved since you last heard me speak. Silver is probably because I spent several years teaching it, and when I when I had to teach it, you got to learn it better, right? But thanks for noticing. I appreciate that. My vocabulary isn't as big as I would like for it to be. I'm not anywhere close to what I would say is fluent, but my pronunciation is pretty good. But anyway, if you have been following our series, this is a series that I started about 2 months ago that is designed at trying to help us understand where government and politics comes from. This is much more involved in the way that the lessons do sort of flow from one to the next. In my sort of typical Adventures in History streams, if you miss an episode, you're going to be fine. You're going to be mostly okay in this series here, but so like don't just run away if you haven't seen episodes 1 through 4. But I will perhaps refer back to things significantly more during these because it is kind of an actual progression from one to the next. You're very welcome, Ra. And I thought that I already had that one open. The biggest issue that I'm running into right now on Twitch is that they have blocked my ability to make highlights until I clear out some of my videos. Twitch has put a 100 viewing hour maximum limit on VODs, and I currently have about 600 hours of content that I need to move before I'm able to make any more clips or any more highlights. So I'm in a bit of a pickle, and I need to start working on trying to fix that pretty quickly because I have basically a month to try to get all of that straightened out. It's kind of tricky. Okay, so we are in our progression. We have started with the earliest concepts of government. The definition that we're sort of working with is one that I explained deeply in episode 1. Government is effectively a way to decide collectively how we use our collective power. What's up, Polly? Good to see you. And politics is the art of convincing people to use their power in a certain way. So power here is not just physical. This is also economic power, intellectual power, technological power, social power, etc. So we started with humans wandering around in the wilderness, and we still had government and stuff at that time. We moved to little bands of people. Then we moved to things like little tribes, and then we moved to chiefdoms. And in the last stream, we moved from chiefdoms to kingdoms. But the kingdoms at this point are effectively just kind of city-states where you have one big city and then a lot of territory kind of around it. And today we're going to pick up with what happens when the population continues to grow, and specifically as those city-states begin to expand. We're going to run into a lot of new troubles, and these are going to be the same sort of troubles, but just in different kind of ways, right? Saknal's trying to come up with an application for vocabulary in Spanish. I'll think about that and try to come up with something catchy, because if it's an app, it needs to be like a one word, and it kind of needs to pop, right? So yeah, like a city-state in the ancient world that we're talking about, the first city-states that emerged in Mesopotamia or in Egypt are going to be basically cities of probably not more than several tens of thousands, and that's including the surrounding areas, right? And that is going to be not big like we would consider it today. You know, a big city today is a city of, tens of millions of people. The population of humanity on Earth at that time was not nearly what it is today. And of course, they don't have the level of technology that we have, and they don't have the command of their food structure the way that we do. So they're not going to be able to grow as quickly or as readily as we are. So we have kingdoms. And this is where we're going to start. All right. So we have a kingdom, which is really just one guy, and usually the government apparatus that has been set up around him to help him rule, which at most early phases is going to be religious in nature. We discussed in the last episode how religion and politics made a pact to sort of mutually support each other. And while this caused a lot of tension between politics and religion, it assured that they were going to be able to basically dictate terms on pretty much everything else in the society. So when our population continues to grow, what are we going to do? Well, population goes up and people don't want to live in the big city anymore. So these little satellite villages that had previously been effectively little feeders into our larger city system, they're little villages that are stationed around the city, usually where smaller residential people that are going to be mostly farmers or pastoralists are going to make contact and then move their goods into the city. Those little villages themselves are going to start becoming cities in their own right. And as the population continues to grow, people are going to need to figure out ways to govern these little cities around what we now might call the capital city. And so we're going to have new government positions that are going to be in charge of these smaller cities. And this is when we're going to start coming up with the first real concepts of what we might call middle management or sort of bureaucratic government structures, where we're going to need something like a mayor or something like a governor. We're also going to need something like a tax collector who's going to be in charge of making sure that these little cities pay all of the duties and taxes that they have to have. So we're going to start expanding our government structure. Most of history, tribal dynamics were very unstable, and many of these groups formed for protection. Polly, there is a lot of protection involved. Survival is also a big motivator, just for being able to make it. You know, if you're a small group and one of you gets sick, can the other couple of members provide enough support for the sick member to survive. So most of the early little bands that we're talking about are somewhere between 20 and 50 people, most likely. And that's going to be the vast majority of human history. If we look at human history as when we became Homo sapiens, we're talking about 350 or 360,000 years. So we're going to be in bands all the way up until probably if we get really, really stretchy with it, probably all the way up until about maybe 24,000 years ago, right? So, Lumpy Dragon Potato, how are you? Good afternoon and welcome. Kevin, I'm doing much better now than I was last week. We mentioned that briefly at the top of the stream, Lumpy, but yeah, it was a pretty bad day, right? Bands between 20 and 50 people. Slipknot is that old. Haha, very nice. Was it also very nepotistic by default? So at that point, we really didn't have government classes. Classes didn't really exist until we were able to start building more of a durable food supply. If you are all expected to pitch in and you're all expected to be able to survive by communal effort, there's really not any such thing as a class. And class doesn't really come into the picture until there is the earliest version of a surplus where people begin to have more leisure time, and the work started shifting to people that were not as capable socially or not as capable physically, or I don't know. That's basically the second episode of the series. If you want to go back, I have started moving all of these to YouTube. If you want to give that a view, if you want to dig through the VODs here in the channel, you can find all of them. And you're okay. Yeah, don't feel bad about anything. We're all good here. So as our population grows and our little satellite villages turn into smaller cities, we have to expand the government. So where do we find these people? Where do we find people that are going to be our mayors or our governors or our king's representatives in these cities? And there is quite a bit of nepotism in this situation. It's good for family members to be given these positions, especially if you want to keep them happy. But you also need people that are capable. And as the bureaucracy becomes more important, you need people that are going to be able to do these roles with a level of efficacy that is not necessarily present or prevalent in a purely nepotistic system. Just because somebody is your brother or your weird cousin doesn't mean that they're going to be a capable ruler. So we need positions that are going to be filled by people that are educated and that are skilled. And while literacy in the ancient world is very, very rare and very, very limited, so we're talking here about literacy back in the 3000s or 2500 range BC, so almost 5,500 years ago, the people that are going to be the most literate are going to be the ones that are in the religion and the ones that are in the government. And the reason we need these people to be literate is because we are encountering ever more increasing complex forms of government that are needed to manage these larger areas. So we're going to start seeing the development of specific bureaucratic forms. We're going to start seeing the development of things like organized tax structures. We're going to see the development of things like the good old-fashioned corruption that we know and expect in most forms of government, where people figure out how to skim, and people figure out how to cook the books, and people figure out how to, inflate one number to make themselves look big, and then deflate the same number to make themselves look bad, right? Can I be more precise on the exact roles in these governments and to the scale of the territory of control that they had? So we're talking about basically the first cities, which are in Mesopotamia, We're talking about the range of time somewhere between 3,500 and 3,000 BC ish. And we're going to continue into the early third millennia, so like 2800s ish BC range. So we're not talking about big giant territories yet. We're talking about one city that might have maybe a few hundred square miles under its territory, and around it are maybe 15 to 20 small villages that are turning into cities. Stephen Nigerian is coming in. What's up, Steve? How's it going? Welcome in, everybody that's in Steve's chat. I was there about 30 minutes ago. I forgot that I needed to stream. Steve and I were just kind of reminiscing about last year's Gen Con, and then I was like, oh crap, I've got to go stream. But welcome in, everybody. Steve, thanks for the raid. If you all are not following my friend Steven, you really should. He's a really great artist and knows what he's talking about. So go talk to that guy. Let's learn about Middle Earth governments. Well, we did that last time I streamed. We were talking specifically about the Numenorians. So you can go back and watch the VOD on that. I actually have a book about political organization in Middle Earth, so we could probably have a whole discussion on that. So if you want to look up a book called High Towers and Strong Places by Timothy Furnish, it is a political history of Middle Earth, and you can read more about that. It's a pretty good book. I was gifted it by a good friend and fellow Tolkien scholar, Mr. Jim, who is a great dude, and had an extra copy of the book and let me have it. So that was great. How did they define hierarchical structure and the person to lead in these times? That is the topic of basically episode 3 of the series. A little bit of charisma, a little bit of physical power, a little bit of economic power, a lot of bit of luck. How much written knowledge is known from that time? None. Because we didn't have writing before the establishment of cities. So we are interpreting most of this from anthropological, archaeological remains and examining structures that are similar to them among less developed civilized levels of people today. We do have quite a bit of modern day comparison with groups of people that are in band structure, tribal structure, chieftain structure, etc. So those people still do exist on Earth today, though they are, of course, shrinking in number and quantity and variety. But especially in the 1800s, when anthropology really started, there was a lot of effort to try to understand a lot of these groups. So, all right, Steve, go eat some foods. Thanks for the raid. Hope you're having a good one. It's not all deductive. It's very structured and fairly scientific, but there is an element of we are effectively assuming, but assuming based on a fairly good amount of supporting evidence. Yeah, man. Safe travels, and I hope that all goes well for you, and hope that you sell out all of your prints, including all the metal stuff, right? So, all right. So what are we doing? We're building things, and we're growing things, and we're trying to figure out how to run things, but we end up needing more stuff, right? Our population is going to continue to grow because we continue to figure out new ways and new technologies to increase our food supply, which also means that we need basically more resources. We need food, we need more water, we need more durable goods. We've got to figure out where to get it. So we start expanding. And in the process of expanding, what we're doing is we're pushing out our arable land, we're irrigating things, we are building new satellite villages that are further out. Some of our own satellite villages that are now cities of their own right have their own structure of satellite villages, and we are pushing the boundaries of the amount of land that we are basically encountering. And again, because all land has a certain carrying capacity to it, and carrying capacity is this amount of supplies that a piece of land can basically provide for a number of people, right? There's only so much nourishment, goods, benefit that you can get from a particular piece of land. So we are having to come up with ways to alter that. We are inventing things like fertilizer. We are exploring first the best land, right? But the best land is also very recognizably the best land. And as we are expanding through this, what we end up finding is other people. And we've always known that other people are out there because we've known that other people were out there as far back as us being with bands, right? But the issue here is when we encountered a band and didn't really like them, we could literally just walk away from them. We could move to a different part of the valley, or we could move over the mountain to another valley, or we could go across the river to another area. But when we have established populations and cities, when we encounter another group of people, they're also established in an like a sedentary location as well. So we don't really feel like moving our entire city. But what we need to do then is figure out how to handle this process, because they're growing and we're growing, but there is a limit to land carrying capacity. So what do we do then? Well, we have already encountered some physical violence in relation to goods and basically durable good consumption and food and water consumption. But war in the small scale is not really what we would picture it. So if we look at tribal structures that go to war, a lot of the effort for war goes into not really fighting. If we look at how a lot of people in small scale bands or small tribes that come into conflict viewed violent physical conflict, a lot of it is posturing and trying to scare people and trying to bully them into compliance without actually fighting. Because if we actually fight, people are going to die. And when people die, well, it's hard to replace them in a tribe, right? We don't have a big population to begin with, so we don't really like the idea of everybody going out and dying, right? If you lose some people, that means the death sentence for a tribe. Exactly, Kevin. We have this small amount of population, and we can't really spend them all willy-nilly like. Other people, you must say I'm bonding with a new coworker over our shared aggressive desire to stay home. I hear you. I hear you. I took the day off today, so I also stayed home. Other people are the worst. Other people could be good, right? But it's it's a mess. The dinosaur TV show handled the origins of war. We are right well. I know it was a part of the show, but it's been so long that I can't remember exactly what it is, Silver. That show seems like one that I might want to rewatch eventually, but I also might watch 3 episodes of it and go, I think I've seen enough. I don't know if it will be as good now as it was when I was younger and had lower standards. But when we are in a structure now where we're a big kingdom and we're a growing kingdom and we have surplus population, at this point, if we're going to fight over a group of, natural resources, it's not the worst thing. And while this sounds really horrible, let me reiterate here that it doesn't take a genius to understand that if one of our biggest problems is population, one way to handle that from a government perspective is to shed some of that population. Now, I'm not saying that this is moral or that we should do it or that we should allow it, but I am saying that it's a fairly pragmatic approach to the solution. If we need land and we need to be able to expand, and we have the capacity to fight with people, and we can lose several hundred or several thousand members of our population without threatening the existence of our population, it's not necessarily the worst thing to go to war. Now, the wars that we see early on are not wars of conquest. Typically speaking, these are going to be what we might call protracted disputes over certain regions, or they might a little bit later on be raids in force. And there are a couple of different reasons to establish this. But if I'm trying to expand into this particular river valley because it's fertile land, and you're trying to expand in this particular river valley because it's fertile land, and I show up with my army and you show up with your army and we fight a single battle, I'm not necessarily looking to conquer you. I'm looking to run you off from this territory, right? I am expanding into this river valley and you're going to be prohibited from expanding into this river valley. So I am not fighting your city with the intent of destroying your city. I am fighting you with the intent of securing these natural resources. So that's sort of a war or a battle over resources. And then we might have later on what's called a raid in force, where I load up a lot of my soldiers and we move into your territory, and we're not going to conquer your territory or to capture your territory. What we're doing is trying to gather up as much of your resources as we can and then run away with it. And if we can kill some of your population, or if we can burn some of your villages, or if we can encourage people to stay away from you, that's a bonus. But we're not necessarily here looking to fight you and conquer you and kill you. We're just looking at stealing your stuff and making it harder for you to live. So the wars here are not the exact same types of wars that we're fighting in the modern world. And they're also still not nearly as big. Our populations here are not big enough to have, armies in the tens of thousands, because our population is only in the tens of thousands. We're talking here probably about armies that are maybe as small as 50 or 100 men, maybe 1,000 at the biggest. So we're not really fighting in these huge set piece battles with formations and standardized armor and weapons and stuff like that. We're just rounding up people that are going to be of age that can swing a sword or run a spear and showing up and causing as much damage as we can. So the wars that we're talking about early on are government tools to secure natural resources, not tools of conquest. Getting other tribes, their women might also have played so that they're not really caring too much about genetic diversity here. If anything, they're trying to establish this concept of the other. So we have to establish a reason to fight for this stuff, right? So our religion is going to be able to offer some assistance here. The other city is not likely to worship the same deities as us, especially early on here in Sumerian culture. Each city is going to have its own patron deity. While you might recognize that their deity exists, you, of course, are going to think that your deity is the best, which is going to give you justification for expansion and fighting against them, because your religion is going to say, our God is the best, their God is evil, we could beat them because our God is more powerful. The political angle here is, of course, that I am going to be able to give you the justification that you need to allow me to continue to rule, because I'm going to be able to provide for you. I'm going to be able to give you the supplies and the food and the resources and the luxury items that you need to make your lives comfortable. We're going to start pointing out differences between us and the other people that might be linguistic or cultural. We're going to really here try our best to draw some fairly clean lines between us and them, because we want everybody to support us and we want everybody to be against them, right? That threat of fighting instead of the actual fighting, right? Plus, you don't want to raise stuff to the ground if you want to get resources, right? So if I go in and I destroy literally everything in this area, if I go back next year, there won't be anything there. So I just want to scare them and steal some stuff so that next year, if I want to, I can come back and do it again, right? This is the proverbial you can shear a sheep many times, but you can only skin it once sort of approach to things. Do these invented religious reasons could alleviate the cognitive dissonance born from inflicting violence on a group of peers? Exactly, Lumpy. Because again, here, war is not, at this time in history, something that is common, and it's not something that is seen as a first resort. A lot of history prior to this, war was the last resort. So if we are building up this concept that we need to fight, we're going to have to offer substantial amounts of mental justification that are going to give us the gas that we need to get over that hill, right? We've got to figure out a way to drum up enough support, the group that we're fighting, and convince our population that it's worth going out to die for. Because again, I mean, people back then, just like us, I mean, they don't want to die, right? It's not necessarily their goal is to go get killed by some person on the other side of the mountain range that has a different language than us. But we have to give them a reason to do that by saying things like, we need natural resources. We need room to expand. They're trying to threaten our way of life. Their God is the wrong God. Our God is the right God. Our God commands us that we need to go defeat the non-believers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if any of this sounds roughly the same as modern day, it's because it is. It's the same justifications that we use to go to war today are the ones that they came up with 5,000 plus years ago, because humans, while we are very different and while we are individuals, as a mass, humanity operates on the same 10 to 12 ideas pretty much for everything. And one of them is other equals bad, right? And if we can convince everybody that the other people are the bad ones, we can mentally justify doing a lot of things to them, including killing them, right? And this is not, again, this isn't moral or good or ethical. It's just the way that we do things. And we should be aware of this. And one of the reasons why we're talking about this is to let everybody, kind of in on the game, that the way that we're doing things now isn't new. It's just the same playbook with like a Mad Libs sort of format, where instead of saying, this religion is the bad thing, you say that this religion or that this person is the bad person, or you say this culture is the bad culture, and you just play the same roles and you pull the same levers and people react the same way. This is effectively how populism works. And the reason that we figured out populism fairly early in the political and governmental structures is that they were literally fighting to keep their positions. The concept of king by itself was not one that was super duper established. There might be people at this time that lived before there was a king, right? So they didn't have this cultural background like we do today, where we have always basically had forms of centralized government over us. These people were literally kind of inventing this as they went, and the way to do that was to appeal to the base nature of humanity, which is how they get into the position in the first place, right? But haven't conquering tribes been a part of human history? Not really. Tribal warfare is actually very rare. If we're looking at human history, the violence between tribes where one tribe goes to conquer another tribe, if we're using tribe in the anthropological sense, meaning group of people probably no larger than 500 living in small villages that are semi-nomadic, there's not really a heavily centralized group. There might be an early version of class structure, but not any sort of king or chief yet, sort of a first among equals route. Tribal warfare where one tribe goes to wipe out another tribe is very, very rare. Very rare. They might have disputes over territory, and they might have dust-ups where we fight a little battle and 10 or 12 people die total, but we don't have we don't have any archaeological evidence or anthropological evidence of this happening super duper frequently. The ancient world was much less populated and much easier for a group to just leave conflict than to stay and fight over things. The concept of wiping the other person out, even at this time period, is still a kind of a misnomer. We don't get that until a little bit later. I mean, we'll talk about that by the end of the stream tonight, but the concept of destroying the other group, that's a fairly recent idea. We just don't see that happening in the ancient world. Those are the things you find fascinating, not the uniqueness of the events, but the structural forces that underpin human experience. Yeah, exactly, Kevin. That we're predictable creatures in many ways, and we are habit-forming creatures in most ways. And it doesn't take a lot to figure out how to manipulate those habits and apply ourselves towards negotiating those forces towards a goal that we want. But if we're doing some fighting and we are still expanding, this growth is going to cause significant issues. And all of the issues that we have been talking about since the very beginning of the structures or the discussions that we've been having here come with the expansion of population. And I know this sounds like McInnes is saying what we should do is limit the population growth. That's not what I'm saying. It's just the fact that a lot of the social and political and government and human problems that we run into is the fact that there are scarce resources and we don't have unlimited amounts of resources. One of the reasons why Star Trek works is that they've invented the replicator and they no longer have scarcity of anything, but that's also why they get peace, right? So this is a problem here. With growth comes problems. And the biggest issue that our early kings are going to face when it comes to this expansion is how to maintain their political structure as we're growing. How do we keep centralized rule over these large areas? Communication becomes a big issue. If you live in a satellite village, I can talk to you in a day. If you live in a city that is outside of my territory, I can probably talk to you in a day and a half or 2 days. If we're talking about 3 cities over in a satellite village, now we're maybe communicating over the span of 4 or 5 days. And that's a long time when we're talking about, hey, the bad guys are here, we need you to come help. And you send a runner. By the time that person gets back, it's going to be a week and a half later, and your village is going to be toast, right? So our communication is a big issue, but this also means that these people don't necessarily feel super connected. If I know that these people aren't going to be able to show up to help me, I might not necessarily be super attached to the idea of following this king. If some raiders from the next city over show up in force and say, hey, we're here now and we're going to kill you right now. Your king is, a week's ride in that direction. We want you to just team up with us and pay us tribute. I might go, well, okay, here's the tribute, and I don't want to die, right? So how do I hold on to that village if they're going to just flip-flop to save their own life, which most people are going to do? So I send my tax collector out and I go, hey, it's time for you to pay your taxes. And you go, oh, well, we're actually not in your structure anymore. We pledge loyalty to the king on the other side of the valley because they sent raiders over here. So all of the taxes that we were supposed to give to you, we actually gave to them, and we're not a part of your group anymore. So we were expecting your tribute and your taxes in the big city, and now we don't get it. So now we have further surplus issues. How are we going to manage this stuff? Well, we're running into the issue here of our inability to expand the resource base, right? People won't follow us if we can't provide. It's just the basic things, right? Do those things still remain if the domain of history is the object of study? I'm not 100% sure what those things is there, Kevin. You're welcome to elaborate. Your knowledge is fairly limited on history. That's fine. guess further back with limited scale of human. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is what happens. At this point, we have archaeology and writing, and we have a ton of evidence that I'm not making this stuff up. This is literally just what starts happening. What had a king to offer to a small farmer just making his own food, living peacefully with his family? Even if the king doesn't have anything to offer, the king can say, I will kill you if you don't. Because the king at this point has a large amount of resources that are going to be brought to bear on small individuals. And bringing people into the fold by force is fairly common. You don't really get to just say, oh, well, I'll just go to some secluded area and build my own little farm and live my own little life. It's going to be much harder to do that. Frank, aloha, what's up? The other valley stole the tribute we're going to pay you, right? Exactly. Or that's what you say. You go, well, they showed up and we had our taxes all ready to give to you, but they stole it, right? Structuring properties of human behavior as becoming nomothetic. Okay, so what you're saying is like, at what point are we affecting it by studying it because we are what we are? Do we start changing our activities because of the way that we see things in the past? Sure, but I hope that's the case. I hope that what we're doing here is looking at what happened in the past to recognize that these things that we dislike about our modern world have been going on for thousands of years. And the only way to effectively switch the script here is to recognize that we're doing it and then stop doing it. Because we can do that. I'm not saying that it's likely or that I'm betting on it, but we can absolutely just change the way that we do things. This is sort of the strongest element of human existence, is that we can recognize patterns, including negative ones, and then go, wait, we don't have to do that. You've been reading a lot on philosophy and history and truth conditions. No, epistemology is fine with me. I actually quite appreciate epistemology. That branch of philosophy is one of my favorites, and it's what drives me to think a lot the way that I do. How do I know that this is true or that this is real? So, nope, sorry, no changes for the better. Best we can do is the first 45 minutes of Groundhog Day. The same thing over and over again, and making it more and more self-serving until we get to the point where we're tired and then we just quit. That does seem to be how we're working on it. So I adhere to verum factum. I would say to a certain extent. I don't know that I'm what I would. Okay. So in the philosophical world, I don't know exactly where I would stand on a lot of these things, because I have not given what I would say is probably enough thought on the philosophical angles of everything. I like reading philosophy, and I like philosophy as a mental practice, but I would not say that I have spent the necessary time to go through all of the mental practices and apply it to every single idea. But I like the concept of verum factum, and I think that, like many philosophical ideas, it's got a lot of truth in it, but I worry that if we try to apply it without any sort of restraint across the board, we run into issues where it just doesn't hold up. Is it fair to argue that we might project modern moral values when trying to understand ancient groups of people? Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason why history is worthy of study, to try to figure out what actually happened, not just what we think happened. It's hard to expect that there's no way out of the cycle when I know that you personally would end the cycle if you had power. It must be possible that at some point half of the people can be educated / brainwashed like me, and then we'll be golden. Yeah, Frank, I think educated is unbrainwashed. I think that the only people that say education is brainwashed are the people that are afraid what would happen if everybody was actually educated. So, anyway, we run into this impasse in our government structure where we run into lacks of resources. If we can't expand the resource base, how do we handle things? Well, again, people are not going to follow us if we don't provide stuff. If we can't give them what they want in a timely manner, they're not going to believe in us. They're not going to follow us. They're not going to obey us. In a structure where all of the needs of everybody can't be met, class competition and class violence is going to become fairly obvious. The idea here is that the rich are obviously going to take advantage of the poor. We see this in history as soon as it starts being recorded. Trump bullied Zelensky. Thank you for the follow. And if the point of making the account and following was to get me to say Trump bullied Zelensky, you didn't need to follow for me to say that. I would have said that with certainty anyway. Human nature gets in the way. Human nature is part of the issue. Yeah. Trying to create a base argument which allows me to revise the Russian Revolution through a different meta-narrative that is non-Western. Oh, bless you. That's interesting. You're just trying to find out the limits of what historical fact is so that you don't fall fully into relativism. I do believe that two different historical writings that use the same set of facts but different descriptions can have equal epistemic value. Well, certainly here, the viewpoint of the person that wrote any source is by itself a set of data, because we can look at the historical and social structures around that person that made those beliefs viable. And we can say that obviously in these areas there was enough of a cultural, historical, factual belief that this was the truth that somebody wrote it down. That fact by itself is an important thing to recognize and to use. Now, does that mean that it's actually accurate to the events as happened? Not necessarily, but we can learn from that because it was a widely enough or powerful enough held idea that somebody decided to record it in history. And then you have this balancing act of how much do we apply to this versus how much do we apply to that, and whether or not this source is going to be more valuable than that source, or if this particular viewpoint is less biased than that one. It's a tough thing to do, but that's why history is a research-based approach to knowledge. You have to dig, and you have to try your best to get at what really happened. And this is why, of course, we need archaeology to assist. It's like these modern communists saying, if only Stalin was the good kind of communism, there would be a utopia. Well, it's also fair to point out that we don't know what the good kind of communism would be because Marx never actually described it in any of his writings. And it's fairly clear that if you actually read most of Marx, he didn't actually know what the perfect government would look like. He did not know what the post-revolution government would be. He just knew that the only way for a state to continue to get better through his version of dialectical materialism was to remain in conflict until there was no more conflict within the ideology of the state itself. So it's a tricky thing. Vuelvo. Apoyo epistemológica a mí también, pero me gustan científicos. Proceso consigo es difícil hacerlo porque tenemos muchas convoluciones, porque pienso que procesos idiomas naturales mantiene trabajar, pero pienso que apliquemos ciencia filosofía. I'm going to have to answer this in English because my Spanish is not technical enough necessarily to give the best answer there specifically. But there is a lot of very small differences in philosophy that have very big implications. And we might look at these small differences and say, oh, they're not really that big of a deal, but they actually end up being a very big deal as you continue. This is the idea that when we begin, we're this far apart, but because of the difference our end goals are very far apart, right? We started this far apart, and then we get this far apart. So, yeah, the science and philosophy argument of where the data is and where our interpretation of the data is always really, really, really tight. All right, so you're welcome to review there, Polly. If I read that wrong, apologize. All right. It's a battle of linguistics, indeed. um, yeah, it's hard for me to say the small words that way. Anyway, so what do we need to do? What's our solution to this? If we have these problems where we're competing, we have limited resources, we are not necessarily going to be able to provide everything that we want, we're having people rebel, we're having villages switch groups, we're having allegiances shift, how do we handle this? Well, the answer is going to be the law. And you're like, you mean Judge Dredd? Not necessarily, I am the law, but we're going to start establishing legal codes. How do we do this? Well, we can look at the first person that did this. The first legal code that we know of is created by a guy named Urukagina of Lagash. So Lagash was one of these Mesopotamian city-states, and Urukagina ruled from somewhere around 2378 to somewhere around 2372. So not a very long rule, but how do we, or why do we look at this guy? Well, the idea here is that he's going to do something that we had not had any record of before. He's going to set out a system of decrees that are going to govern how all of the activity in his kingdom should operate. And he's going to distribute this in written form fairly widely, because we have lots of different sources, written sources, that are going to talk about this. We're going to see a lot of different types of references to various decrees and legal structures that he's made. And we even know a lot of what was in the sort of the structure of the law itself. We know that there were attempts at clarifying tax rates. We know that there are going to be specific tax bracket kind of things. We're going to describe what is and what isn't in the sort of public service sector. For example, if you were in certain qualifications, the city would pay for your funeral if you met certain qualifications. We also know that among these rules are very clear delineations that attempted to protect the poor people from rich people abusing them. So we can learn a lot from the legal structure that Urukagina is going to create here. And this, again, is this attempt to centralize power. If I'm the one that is distributing the law, if I'm the one that is going to hand you this set of decrees, this set of beliefs, this set of structures, you're going to have to do what I tell you to do. Here's what I'm telling you to do. But again, here, we're looking at things that aren't just give me power. Yes, there are going to be tax things here, but we're also attempting to address social issues like, look, I know that the rich people are abusing the poor people, and because I'm king, I'm going to try to make them not abuse you as much. Because this is the recognition that we still need the participation of the lower social classes in the political structure to give the head of the government his support. And there are going to be things like protecting the sanctity of priesthoods, and stealing from temples gets punished really badly. Again, here, the recognition that the legal structure is going to be put in place to sort of cement this government/religious alliance at the top of the social power structure. And we're going to try here to offer more guidance. We're going to give you this as a way to settle disputes, because you can't necessarily come in front of the king anymore. If you are 10 villages over, you can't just drop everything for a month and go to the capital city, wait in line to hear the king's decree, over your individual situation. So if the king is going to give us laws, I can look to the law and say, look, you're breaking the law. And then I can drag you up in front of a citizens council or call you out in public and say, this person is breaking the law. Here's what the law says, and you're doing it wrong. This is going to eliminate a lot of the social issue that we're facing. And this is going to further centralize the king, because then the king is going to be able to say, you're solving your problems because I helped you, right? I'm giving you something that is helping you run your life, and you're giving me your allegiance because of that. So we're going to not just have societal norms and values, but we're going to codify those. Those things that used to be just suggestions are now going to be laws. They're not going to just be, well, you can do that if you want to. This is the difference between, a law that says if you do this, you're going to be punished, and a value that says if you do this, you're just going to get the thumbs up from somebody, right? So in one way, we can actually see this as an attempt from a government position to potentially expand into a little bit of the religious world's power. Because if the government is going to be able to codify the values, this is also going to say that in a certain way, the government is going to have some say-so over what is moral. Because our values and our morals are going to be very closely related, sociologically speaking. So how then do we differentiate a religious command versus a temporal law? Well, if I do this, the gods are going to get mad at me and they might punish me, but the gods might not punish me because they're capricious. If I break the law, the king is definitely going to punish me because I can go see him and he can show up at my front door, or he can send people to kick my door down and kill me. So maybe I should do what the king says. But doesn't this both instill the same concept of what is right and wrong, right? Unlike guidelines, Lagatter, no more guidelines. This is just like this is the law. Kivit says that they're just trying to figure out what it means. Reality created in the mind in congruence with material reality. That'll drive you crazy. That'll definitely drive you crazy. The arbitrary nature of these writings and the intrinsic flaws within Marxism, combined with human nature, make it so that each generation of people pop up claiming that their version is the right one, and that the others just did not read it correctly. Well, the kicker here is that Marx literally didn't write that. So anybody that says Marx wrote what happened after the end of the revolution is just they're reading Marx wrong. They're not reading Marx wrong. They're just not reading Marx, period, because it just doesn't say it. If a revolution is a continuous process instead of a quick turn, which one is better? Ooh, that's a tough one. It depends on how many people are dying and how frequently, Kev. It might not help with the foreign government taking your stuff, but maybe at least this helps keeps the other village under the same government from taking your stuff. Frank, that's exactly correct. And if that other village over there is just slightly bigger than your village and they show up and bully you around, now you have the law to point at, right? You can literally say, you are against the law for doing this. I'm going to turn you into the king or to the king's man who's going to show up here next week, and now you're in real trouble. You can always ask for parlay, no? I guess you could, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it exists in the ancient world, right? Okay, so we have established the law. And after Urukagina, we get several different law codes, and we see them start proliferating. If you've ever read the Code of Hammurabi, is the first law code known to humans. That was your World Civ teacher lying to you. The Code of Hammurabi is it's on the list, and it's a very big one, and it's an important one. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but it's by far not the first. It's 600 years or so after the first. Well, not 600 years. Closer to 500 years. But anyway, so again, we've established the law. Our purpose here is we're going to try to eliminate arguments. We're going to clarify specifically what is and what is not the law. We're going to give you some guidelines here. We're going to codify our norms. We're going to clarify our social structures. We're going to be able to say who fits where. We're going to be able to describe who is in the position to do what. We're going to give certain rights to certain groups. We're going to deny certain rights to certain groups. And we're going to reinforce differences and similarities. We're going to say that everybody is under this law, but only these people are under that law. And while that might sound really petty and like a double standard, a lot of the laws are created to reinforce double standards or triple standards or quadruple standards, right? The law itself is not blind. Justice, as much as we would like for it to be blind, has never really been blind because it's always imparted by humans who are not unbiased. We're all biased. It's just the way that it is. A lot of historians don't use causal mechanisms and change, so a lot of the time they project an inference on the past based on these material remains in the now. But it might be just as well it might as well just be an extremely simplified projection of a logical inference that never was. Well, sure, but the answer here, or the response to that is, it is just as likely to be accurate to what it was if they're doing it the right way and they're basing it on logic. Unless we're going into some sort of multiverse theory where anything is potentially possible, so any guess is just as likely to be wrong as it is right. But that's not the way that good historians would do things. A lot of lazy historians will guess on stuff to sell books that make a lot of money, but that's not necessarily the good or the right way to do it. All right, so another need for this law, because we're expanding and we have more people in the government now, we're going to be making sure that the governors and these mayors and these tax collectors are actually following the instructions of the king. While prior to us having a legal structure or a defined legal code, everybody could just say, well, I'm doing what the king told me to say. Or I'm doing what the king told me to do, and I'm following the commands of the king as he told me. And that leaves a lot of interpretation. But if I write it down, this eliminates some of that interpretation. If I say, you will collect X dollars from this city, you can't go to that city and say, well, the king told me to round up a lot of money from you all, so I'm just going to take a whole bunch of money from you. Because now we have, written tax codes that describe exactly what you're supposed to pay. So if the tax collector shows up and they're being a jerk, you can say, that's not the way that it runs. Also, you can make sure that your governors are actually enforcing your will instead of being little petty tyrants of their own, because you're going to be able to, again, point back to the law as it's written. Now, this doesn't solve all of the issues, obviously. This doesn't solve the disputes for a lot of people because, again, most people can't read. But if I know that there's a legal code, and I know that there are people that can read it for me, and I can go to a priest, I can hope that that priest is going to read it for me, and it's going to solve some of the issues. I'm going to try to apply myself to this structure as much as possible because I want it to work out, because it potentially might work out better for me this way, right? For the heart of man is easily corrupted. It is easily corrupted. Seems clear that once you have laws binding people into groups, evolution can act at that scope, because a better system of laws will achieve more success for their group. But it feels like laws is an arbitrary thing to me for a single out when pre-law customs and habits should function the same. The kicker here, Frank, is that, the formal laws that we're talking about here are replicable. I can literally write 20 copies of this law and send it to the 20 cities around my capital, and everybody can then see exactly what I mean, right? This is different than me just gathering everybody in a room and saying, I am the king, this is the law, now go back and go back and do what I tell you to do. Because each person then is going to remember that perhaps slightly differently. And even if I write a nice speech and recite it to all of my governors and then tell them to go out and enact this, they're not going to remember that perfectly. They're not necessarily going to have the same emphasis that I want them to have. They might hear part of this and they might think that this is the big thing that I really, really want them to do. and they're going to have different ways of applying this sort of edict that I might give out. But if I can write it down and then send it to them, and everybody knows these are literally the words that are the law, this is going to be a much more clear way to communicate. This doesn't mean that I still can't interpret this in a shady way, but it limits the scope of my ability to monkey around with it, right? I can't say, oh, well, I heard you emphasize this part more, my king, and I thought that was the part that you thought was most important, because now you can just say, it's literally what I wrote. I literally told you exactly what I wanted. This is written in stone, sometimes quite literally, and everybody got the same copy of this. I'm expecting all of you to do this the same way, etc., etc. That makes sense, right? I wonder, was there some sort of herald citing laws in public forum? Yeah, there were. Like, theoretically, every law gets promulgated, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody shows up to listen to it. We do, in just a little bit here, get public displays of the law. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody can read. So even if I carve my law codes into giant stela and plant them into the middle of your city, that doesn't mean that you can read it. You can just go look at it and go, look at the law. It's this thing, right? Okay, so we're expanding now, and we figured out ways to try to contain centralization. We're still trying to figure out ways to handle this resource issue, though. So we're going to come up with a new way of doing things. This is, again, another shift. So even the shift from the beginning, this is a secondary shift. And we're going to discuss what happens when a king decides to not just beat up the other person, but take over the other person. And this is when we shift a title from king to emperor. So there's a lot of nitpicking that we could do, but effectively here, what's the difference between a king and an emperor? A king is a person that rules over one group that is more or less culturally similar. An emperor is a person that rules over multiple groups that are sometimes varied in culture. So I'm not just ruling my people, I'm ruling my people and somebody else. Right? So that's an emperor as a difference. So how do we get to this idea of becoming an emperor as opposed to becoming a king? Well, we go conquer the other people, right? Those others that we have spent several hundred years singling out, that we fought against in, skirmishes and raids in force, territorial disruptions. We're going to decide that they're too problematic, that we're wasting too many resources fighting them over and over and over again. So what we do is we decide to go conquer them. This is actually a big mental leap. The ideas of conquest are very different than the ideas of fighting. I can go fight you all day long because you're the other person, but for me to invest the time and the effort into conquering you, we are now moving into a new level of thought process here. And this is why we see it take a little while to happen, but it's still driven by this population growth. My population is continuing to grow. I still need more natural resources, and I can get that from expanding, and I can keep expanding until the point where I run into other expansion. But how do I keep going past that? Well, then I actually have to go beat the other people up. So our wars here are going to shift, and they're going to shift from raids and territorial disputes to conquest. I'm not now just going to take your stuff, I'm going to take you. And you're not just going to give me, everything in your stores. We are going to establish a system of tribute where I'm going to expect this from you every year without me showing up with my army to make you pay it, because you know that the threat of my army is real, and that if you don't give it, then I will show back up and kill you. And I'm going to make you my subject. You are being subjected to the rule of another. And it just so happens that the creation of law is going to aid us in this concept, because as we go to conquer, we're going to be able to promulgate our law into these other areas. So this is where somebody like Hammurabi is really going to be interesting and effective here, because Hammurabi is an emperor. He was Babylonian, but he conquered many other areas. And why his law code is so important to us is that we have multiple copies of it on these big stela that he dropped into these other areas because he conquered them. So he conquers you, he goes to your city. In the middle of your city, he plants this big, sometimes 6 foot tall stone. On the surface of it has every single law that is your new law on it. So you now know, when you look at that, who rules you. You are the subject of this guy whose picture is carved on the top of it with his god on top of it. So he conquered you by the power of this god, and here is his temporal authority that has been projected over you. And if you break these laws, you're now questioned to him. Not your local king, but him. He's in charge now. Your local structure is potentially going to be dramatically ripped out at the roots, because we're going to establish governors and territorial overlords in these ways. We'll talk about this a little bit more next stream, how we handle these imperial territories. But this is me establishing my claim. This is absolutely planting the banner, right? I don't necessarily just show up and plant my flag in your territory and say you're not part. I will drop my stone of law on top of you, right? You are now under new management. Exactly, right? You are now part of my way of doing things. But the kicker here, and this is a tough one. This is a give and a take kind of scenario here, because I'm going to get the resources of that new territory. I'm going to be able to add their work and their labor to my work and labor pool. I'm going to add their natural resources to my natural resources pool. But guess what I just did? In the process of expanding, I expanded my population dramatically. If I go conquer a city of 10,000 people, I now have 10,000 new mouths that I'm supposed to feed. I'm now expected to provide for all of these other people. And we have just created a whole new level of issues. I have to figure out how to manage all of these other people, and they're not like me. They're different than I am. They have different viewpoints than I do. They worship different gods than I do. They speak different languages than I do. They have different cultures than I do. Yeah, with great power comes great responsibility. So how do I manage this? Well, now I'm going to have to come up with all of these other problems, or solutions to all these other problems. I need way more competent military leadership now. I can't just lead the armies by myself, because I've got to be back home running the kingdom. How do I manage my armies? I now have to have judges that are going to interpret my laws for me, because I don't understand the customs or the language of these other people, so I can't necessarily make sure that they're hearing the things the way that I want them to hear them. I have to have systems now of spies that are going to report on what's actually happening in their structure, and how I'm going to be able to make sure that they're following my rules without them knowing that I'm spying on them. I now have to have way more bureaucrats, because with expanded power comes expanded goods, and I'm going to have to figure out ways of making sure that my merchants that are part of my territory that go to these other cities are going to be treated with the benefits of being us. Because the biggest new issue that we run into when we handle empire is the law. And we had put so much effort into creating this law to establish ourselves, but now we have to create new laws that are going to separate us from them. And we're going to get primacy because we won. I'm going to make sure that my people get treated better than their people, but I still have to write the law in this narrow path that allows them to recognize that they have to swallow the legal changes or face the spear, right? And it's so difficult to walk this line. And this is sort of leading us into the really big problems that are going to face empires, and we'll talk about this again in the next stream. But the concept here is always one based around the idea of growth and expansion. And every time we grow, even a little bit, we're going to run into big problems that we're going to have to try to solve. All right, so let me try to sift through chat here. We've got some people talking with each other, and that's totally fine. So Hammurabi's code is nowhere near the first code. That is correct, but is sort of the first imposition of the same code over many cultures. Not even that, Frank. We do see some of this happening on small scale prior to Hammurabi. The reason Hammurabi is so famous is because of the really, really cool way that he did it. He was one of the first ones that we found because he was very proficient and very emphatic with how broadly he spread his law code. So we have to kind of remember that archaeology, when it first started in the 1800s, was looking at things that were easy to find because they didn't necessarily have the sort of practices and skills and, in many cases, ethics that we have today. So they were just looking at like, okay, what do we have a lot of? And we found this guy named Hammurabi, who is this king of Babylon. And we find, dozens of these big stela that have his writing all over. And we go, oh, this dude was the first dude that ever did this. Look at how cool it is. And then subsequently, after we did much more research, we start finding that he did not originate most of this, that he was just very successful in doing something that other people had done previously. So the books for, 50 years in world history talk about Hammurabi doing this and Hammurabi doing that and Hammurabi being really cool. And I'm not trying to take anything away from him. The dude was really, really cool. Historically speaking, he's an interesting figure. I've never met the guy. I don't know what his temperament was like. But the idea here is, as we've learned more through more advanced archaeology and more thorough archaeology, we've realized that he was not as innovative as we first believed, that the picture is much more varied and nuanced, which is sort of how most research happens. We find something that's really neat, we get very excited about it, and then the more that we study it, we go like, okay, I get it, but not as cool as maybe as it first was. Hammurabi stelas are really cool, right? You can go to the Louvre and see one that's about 6 foot tall. It's a massive block of basalt. It's really freaking cool. I've got pictures of it. It's really neat to go see. I think it would be cooler if I could see some tablets that talked about Urukagina's law code. That would be cooler to me because I know the purpose of it. Even though I would still totally take you by like if I was the tour guide in the Louvre, I would take you by Hammurabi stela and I would tell you how cool it is and what it represented. But if, on the other side of the wall was Urukagina's tablets where he was giving away the law, I would also walk you around and go, but here's the OG version of this, right? And you got to put everything in context. And the biggest issue with most early archaeology is that we did not have the context. We did not understand what we were looking at as well as we do now. And that's not necessarily a slam on early archaeologists. It's just that we now know more information about it, right? Mendel is still a really big figure in genetics, even though we know what's actually happening now with DNA, right? We know how the genes are actually, distributed through individual process of sexual replication, and we know how the individual genes affect the colors of things like the flowers or the pea pods or stuff like that. That doesn't mean Mendel's work wasn't important. It's just that he has been superseded by much more detailed work that came behind him. And, that's kind of what's happening with Hammurabi in general. All right. Got some talk. Great power comes great responsibility. Yeah, you got to be responsible, right? It's tough to be emperor. Okay, cool. So, we got any sort of questions about the material for today? we can kind of elaborate on that, or I guess just if we have questions on general or in general, we can answer those. But that is sort of what I had planned for the stream. We made some big strides today. Kingdoms establishing legal codes to protect their governments was a big deal, and kingdoms figuring out that conquest was an absolutely sizable thing to do. Not sizable, absolutely legitimate thing to do, but then running into the same issues is a pretty big problem. Rule number 1. You can make an image of Hammurabi, but only if you give him a really cool beard. The beard is actually a really important part of Babylonian imagery, and it's supposed to represent virility and strength, but it also calls directly back to the way that they drew a lot of their male deities. So this was a symbolic recognition that the king ruled with the favor of the gods. So again, we see the combo of government playing off of religious imagery. There's a guy that kind of portrays this first. Prior to Hammurabi, if you Google this guy's name, Naram Sin, we have a stela of Naram Sin, who was a king in one of these Sumerian city-states, who depicts himself fighting in warfare, but he draws he didn't do any of the art, but he commissioned the art to have his figure about yay tall, and all of the other people in the structure or on the stela are about yay tall, and he's wearing a particular type of headdress that was reserved for the depiction of gods. So in Naram Sin, we actually see a ruler claiming through visual depiction divinity. This is the earliest example that we have of a ruler attempting to communicate some direct linkage with the gods via picture. Because let's remember, even though the stela has writing on it, most people are not going to be able to read the writing. They're just going to see the image of Naram Sin being gigantic and see him with the headdress, and they're going to go like, oh, that guy, yeah, he's really strong, he's really powerful, right? Globulus, welcome, and what's up? Let me do the shout out here. If you all are not following Globulus, you should be. If you have any interest at all in the world of AI, Globulus is the dude to talk about. Or to talk with, rather. Globulus streams a lot more frequently than I do. And talks a lot about AI and Globus. My bad. Why am I saying Globulus? Holy crap. My bad. I know this. I've been in your stream and we've talked before off stream. Dude, my bad. I'm having a day. Globus. Sorry, Globus. Super apologies, man. Globulus. Where did I get Globulus from? I don't even know where I got Globulus from. Anyway, Globus. Go follow Globus, who streams a lot about AI stuff. The question here is, am I familiar with a Dictator's Handbook? Like, I know that it's a book, and I know that it's about, like, political power and stuff like that. I've never read the book, though. I think the kind of the basic premise of the book, and you're welcome. Again, I haven't read it. I've just read reviews and I've heard people talk about it. I think the basic idea of the book is that there's a certain, like, elite that's in every government, and for a dictator to remain in power, they have to have these elite that are going to back them. And these elite are people like heads of the military, people that have tons of money, People that are in super well social connected families, maybe like industrial heads or oligarchs. We might say oligarchs. That to be a good dictator, you have to have the oligarchs that support you. If that's incorrect, Globus, please do correct me. Or if anybody else has read the book, you're also welcome to chip in and say, McInnes, you've got it all wrong. Again, I've not read the book. I've just sort of heard people talking about it. Trying to catch up with chat. Got some crosstalk going on. Lagatter is laughing at me, probably for mispronouncing Globus's name. Like short actors being depicted as taller through the tricks of cinema. They were giants in those days. There are definitely lots of thoughts that there were giants in the ancient world, but it's also fair to point out that due to really, really bad neonatal vitamins and nutrition and poor nutritional values in the average types of food that most people in the ancient world ate, they were also way shorter than we are. Average heights of people in the ancient world, when we're talking about during this time, is probably a foot to a foot and a half shorter than the average heights of people today, because they just literally didn't have nutrients the way that we do. They ate grain for 2.5, 3 meals a day. And the addition to that may be some runny milk or a piece of cheese. They're not getting a lot of protein in their diet. They're working really, really hard. Women that are pregnant were going to have a lot of work that they were doing, and they're still going to be burning significant numbers of calories while they're pregnant. So you're not really developing very fast in utero. So if there was a person born that made it to like 6 foot tall, they're going to be huge to the people in the ancient world. And even though today we would be like, yeah, that person doesn't even get to swipe left on me on Twitter, on Tinder, right? Could we get a stream history of beards? Nah, maybe. I'd have to work on that one. That would take a lot of effort. Globus says that he recommends it. I guess here, the Dictator's Handbook. When I talked about how the king controlled other groups, it reminded me of some of the themes. Interesting. Yeah, I've kind of been meaning to read it, but I also, I mean to read so many books, and I always end up preferring the weird little niche books that I want to read over the big popular books that everybody tells me that I should read. And that's probably just because I'm a nerd. I'm reading a book right now on the collected origins of the myths of King Arthur. And I'm reading another book on economic theory that I don't really need to read because I've already read 10 books on economic theory. But I don't know. It's sort of my stuff. I will make the effort to obtain a copy of the Dictator's Handbook, which will be the biggest step towards me actually reading it. Because if I get a copy of it, then I'm going to guilt myself into reading it, because I will have spent money on it. And I don't not read books if I buy them. Maybe, I don't know, well, I guess my next holiday would be my birthday, which is in October. Maybe I'll ask for it as a birthday present. I don't really have any reason to buy myself a present right now, and probably shouldn't spend the money. You were laughing about the Emperor's New Clothes remark. Okay, cool. Did people really ride tall horses to compensate for their lack of height? Yes, I think that's a lot of the cases, though tall horses in the ancient world are not as common as we might think, because horses back then were also not as big as the modern ones were. What's up, Noger? Good to see you. You also read books. If you buy them, it might take you a decade, but you'll get it done. Sounds like you already get the gist of the book if you're reminding people of the book. Yeah, so that's the thing, DCI. The only reason it would be valid and valuable, and this is not to demean the reasoning. I'm just saying, like, the biggest reason for me to read that book is that a lot of other people have, and then I would be able to make I'd be able to make specific references to it, as opposed to just referring to it in general. So there is value in that, especially when books get really, really popular. It's beneficial to read them, even if you kind of know what they are already going to say, because especially if you're doing very forward-facing history and anthropology and sociology like I'm doing, it's very helpful to have the ability to speak to people on that level about something that they have read themselves, and not just go, well, yeah, I've heard of that, and here's what I think it says, but to be able to say, oh, yeah, I've read that, so here's exactly what it says, and I understand that. Like, this is why I read The Dawn of Everything. This is why I read Guns, Germs, and Steel. I read Twilight because I wanted to be able to reference things to my students, and it was an experience, right? So I do a lot of stuff to put myself in the kind of public circle because I want to be relevant. I want to be able to speak to people on levels that they understand, that they have common sense with, or common ground with. Some people definitely like their conspiracies. That's for sure. Polly, that's no problem. Don't worry about that at all. Everybody's always welcome to chat. You read a few pages of Twilight, and that's why you didn't bother reading popular things anymore. I understand. I get what you're saying. It was not what I would say a well-written book. It looks like. So. All right. Do we have any other questions about content, or I guess like other ideological questions or stuff like that? If not, we can see who is screaming, and we can go do a bit of a raid. Twilight was your favorite books? If it makes you happy, it didn't hurt me for you to read that, so do your thing. That's such an Edward thing to say. I thought Edward and Jacob were both weird, so I am on team celibate Bella. I mean, I really don't care if people read Twilight. I would prefer people to read as opposed to not read. Just to be honest, reading at all in the modern world is a benefit and a bonus. And I encourage people to read, even if they read books that I don't personally like, because the effort involved in reading and completing something is a valuable skill to have. And the attention span that is drawn from reading any book of any size into completion is absolutely remarkable, and we should not downplay that. I would prefer that people read, even if they don't particularly agree with me. I would rather have a person that is incredibly well read and has opinions that differ from me than somebody that agrees with me that can't explain why because they don't really know why. Reading and learning is a big deal. And while it might seem like I'm going, oh, ha, 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 I really don't care if you read, Twilight because it's actually sucky. I didn't like it. That doesn't mean I don't want other people not to read it. A lot of other people love that. And if it brings you joy, it didn't hurt me at all for you to read that and it bring you joy. So why should I get bent out of shape about it? I support people spending their time in ways that make them happy, that don't hurt other people, that encourage them to read, increase their vocabulary, to build some resiliency in attention span. All of these things are good, right? So I'm assigning you to read Mein Kampf. I've read Mein Kampf, and I would tell people that want to understand Hitler to read Mein Kampf. I don't like the ideas in it. I think Hitler was a racist scumbag, But if you want to understand him, one of the best ways to do that is to literally read his own words. And I think that there is quite a bit of legitimate historical research that can be done by reading Mein Kampf. Again, I'm not telling you to be a Nazi. The Nazis were obviously on the wrong side of history. But it's an important historical work. And if you haven't read Mein Kampf, it's something that would be worth reading. I'm not going to tell you to like it, and I'm not going to tell you to support it. But yeah, I mean, I've read it. I've considered doing a whole stream on it. But, you know, just because it's a thing doesn't mean it's a good thing. I'm not promoting the ideology within it. I'm directly in opposition to the ideology within it. But it's a fascinating enemy. Or, yeah, Know Your Enemy. It's a fascinating read. It's bizarre and it's trippy and it's weird and the logic is internally flawed on multiple levels. But if you want to know how he did what he did, there you go. Noger got banned for his Ted Kaczynski stream. For reading. Was that actually why Noger got banned? Because he read some of Ted Kaczynski's philosophy? Oh, wow. Noger, I didn't know that was the case. I didn't think they ever told you why you got banned. Maybe if Noger's around, he can clear that up. You don't understand fascism and you never will? I mean, understanding it and the logic that I guess technically it's logic, but the rationale that they use to come up with it is not the same as agreeing with it, right? I can understand a lot of arguments. That doesn't mean that I agree with those arguments. YouTube doesn't distinguish between supporting and evaluating terrorist manifesto. Oh, I see. Interesting. Maybe I should be careful about doing a stream on Mein Kampf then. Maybe that should be a special Discord co-chat kind of stream. Interesting. Maybe I could sell tickets to that. And then I could use it to buy Dictator's Handbook. Or we could do like a Mein Kampf book club on Discord. It's a sure way of getting on a list. Oh, dude, if we're talking about who's on the list, I'm probably on all kinds of lists. The problem is that it doesn't have much internal logic. It's is it time contextual? Is it path dependent on the West? Is it a form of political patterns? Does it have so all of these things are things that we could absolutely discuss, give it. And those are deeper questions than probably just the couple of minutes that I want to give them here on stream. I'm sure they technically do distinguish in TOS, but don't expect them to be very careful. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, I'll consider these things, but and again, I don't even know how much interest there would be. I don't know if anybody really cares about doing something like doing book club on Mein Kampf. This might not be something that anybody gives a crap about at all. So, all right, let's go ahead and do a raid here because it's time for me to get off of stream. And because it's Friday and we are not streaming on the normal night, we do get to stream, or we do get to raid into a channel that we do not normally get to raid. And that is my friend Sohn. Sohn is a game streamer, and he specifies in playing older and retro games, which are really cool. And right now he's playing Marvel vs. Capcom, which is a fairly old fighting game. He's fighting Thanos right now. So we're going to go raid in and say hey to Sohn. Our battle cry is adventure if we hit the raid, and if you've got any of those lovely adventure hats, you can throw those in to the chat as well. I'm going to be trying to stream in the next couple of days. I might even stream tomorrow. I'm not sure. I want to try to get some work done on this kit that I've been building because I literally haven't worked on it in about a month. So that's the plan. So thanks, everybody. Tuna and Kyle, thank you for subscriptions. Thank you to everybody else that is subscribed. And also thank you to patrons on Patreon and people who have sent me books. So thanks, everybody. Let's go see Sown, and I'll see you next time.